And I've been able to, among the other art projects that I've been doing, like public space projects, small sculptures and the like, I've been able to start developing. I mean, I'm still very at the very beginning. I mean, I'm able to make like helmets and maybe breastplates, but like making a whole suit, I don't have the time because there's the university. I have to do that first, and then when I'll be done with university, I will eventually like go full-time armor making. Hopefully, if people would
give you commissions. Yeah,
exactly.
You've done some commission stuff.
Yeah, I did do like one great helm for in Scotland, and other people have been asking, but they are always turned off by the prices.
My advice. So I'm not obviously experienced as an armourer, but as someone who buys and sells stuff, I would say get something that you can do and start doing that to make the money, and then expand from that. So I mean, I think great helms is a good. And it's interesting in a way because it's almost like the evolution of the armourer, the plate armourer as well, because they essentially started off with helmets, because the first bits of plate armour, really, certainly in the medieval period, unless we go back to Roman, were helmets. So a lot of the people, and Helmschmied, the famous armourer, means a helmet maker or smith, and so in a way, starting off with helmets is kind of poetically correct, isn't it? But I did a little bit of tinkering armour making myself, and I made some kind of Visby style gauntlets and stuff like this, which I no longer have, unfortunately, but it's great. It's physically tough on you, isn't it?
No, not yet. I mean,
okay.
I've been so...
You have to wear your ear muffs. It's loud,
that's
really loud. Never underestimate how loud it is hitting a piece of sheet steel.
Forging plate, especially like raising a 4mm helmet, very loud. So. But the thing is, I've always trying to make everything like how it was done. So no gas torch, no angle grinders, so I tried trying to use like a cold forge, only like manual tongs and hammers, and no welding, which is, I mean, that does influence a lot on the price because it takes more time to do. But I mean, the final product is definitely different.
So most helmets that you'll buy, even from some very good armourers, are two welded halves, aren't they?
Two welded halves.
And this is, I suppose, by purists, this is looked down on. From a functional point of view, you could argue that if it's very well welded, there's no reason why. Exactly. There's no reason you're making essentially one piece of steel. But I suppose there's a degree of snobbery involved in this, because number one, you want something as close to the original as possible, which means forged out of one piece. Funnily enough, though, helmets were in the 17th century sometimes made out of two pieces, weren't they?
Forge welded, but forge welding sheet metal is quite difficult.
So a lot more difficult than electric arc welding.
So we'll leave that out for now. I know that Albert Collins is, for example, an armourer from Sweden. He is making morions, I think, from like forge welded, and that's quite impressive. Impressive.
And of course, I suppose the other thing, which if someone was getting into an armouring, one of the things they could attempt at the sort of beginner levels would be something like a Spangen helm. So those are helmets that are made out of pieces like you would see on the Boer tapestry, for example. Sometimes 4 segments with cross pieces, sometimes more than that. In Eastern Europe, you sometimes get like Mongol helmets are sometimes made of a whole series all riveted together. That'd be quite an interesting project to do. Have you ever done a Spangen helm? No,
I mean, the closest thing was that great helm, which had the skull was made in the front and the back. Like had a rivet, they were riveted together, and that's more complicated than you think, because you have to fit the two pieces together. And it's like with clamps and with if you don't tack weld it, which I didn't. So then I was always trying to use just like vice, which also is kind of anachronistic. I have no idea how the hell they work together, because they didn't have screw vices. So it's like maybe they had like some wedge.
So it's interesting. So I mean, I've got some armour, some of it that's better than others, and it's interesting when you see someone having a full harness put together these days. Most armourers tend to use sticky tape, duct tape quite a bit, and also little nuts and bolts to temporarily put everything together to check that it all works before they put the rivets in, because obviously if you put the rivet in and it doesn't work, you've got to unrivet it. And those kind of things they wouldn't really have had access to, would they?
Not in the 14th century.
Obviously not sticky tape.
Later on they would, but I mean, they could like temporarily rivet and then like just shear off the rivet, or they could use some tar maybe, or like some natural adhesive, like.
Or maybe even little cords or something.
Yeah,
maybe
it could be like some knots, but
anyway, there's lots of unknowns obviously about armouring, about how they do certain things, and probably also, just like with fencing or anything else, there were different ways of doing things. So there's many ways to skin a cat, and probably different armourers had different tricks for doing different things. So your page on Facebook is an amazing resource, and it is the best resource for 14th century armour that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And if you couple it with Elon Spina's Knight Errant channel videos, you've got like more stuff about 14th century armour there than was even physically available when I was, actually when I was a teenager and when I was at university studying or trying to study that stuff, which is amazing. It's amazing how much the internet has facilitated that.
Yeah.
And so what are your aims now with that? Where would you like to take it?
I mean, recently I've been trying to put all together all the images that we have, all the images of the extant pieces that we have on the Facebook page. They're in different albums in the photo section, and I wanted to have like actual like a PDF document. So then I put everything together in a single document, and that's available also in the group. So that's like when every object has like all the pictures that we have available, and then date, metallurgy if possible, size, weight, thicknesses, and heat treatment
Well, the obvious question is, what about a book?
What about a book? Well, I wouldn't have any idea where to start. And
really?
I mean, it's and also.
But that needs to be in a book.
Yes,
I'm a big fan of online resources, but I think that a book gives you something else. It brings a different. And I even think, and I mean, I'm looking at this at the moment with a couple of my own projects, of just putting something online and publishing it, because some people just like to have it in book format anyway. And there's lots of ways of self-publishing these days. So anyway, well, we can talk about that after filming. But I'd strongly, I mean, Toby is doing amazing stuff with 15th century armour, but as far as I know, no one's preparing any really good book on 14th century. I think there is
one. There's a person in America that's doing something similar.
Okay.
I feel like I kind of.
But I feel like
by just making it for free available online. Don't
do that. So I think there's a generational thing as well, and I think that people below a certain age bracket, I won't say what that age bracket is, but people below a certain age bracket are better at collating evidence from historical evidence from lots of different sources and presenting it in new and imaginative ways that are more user-friendly and useful, actually. And what you've done with a lot of your drawings and reconstruction drawings and stuff, I think that's brilliant, and that's what's needed. And Toby did it with his book as well, and I'm sure he'll do it with the next one. When I was looking at arms and armour books as a kid, what I wanted was to not just see a picture of a harness. I wanted to see how those pieces go together and how it looked in different flexation and things like this. And Toby's thinking about that, you're thinking about that, and that's absolutely fantastic. I think that's because armour's it's not a statue, it's something that has to work. And my favourite word, context, it has to not just work in, how does an arm bend? It's not as simple as that. We have to think about how it bends in every plane, but then also what's this type of armour, this type of, say, arm harness, why is that designed that way and another arm harness is designed another way? Are they doing different things? Are they for different types of fighting? Are they for fighting different types of opponents, for using different types of weapons? It's a really, really broad thing. You have to bring everything, and for a proper archaeological kind of approach to studying these things, you've got to pull everything in and do lots of drawings and reconstructions and testing, all this kind of stuff. It's experimental archaeology, I think. So the other thing I note is on your pages, so two things, actually I'll mention two things at once while they're in my head. So number one, although it's about 14th century armour, it's very clear that you personally have become very interested in early 15th century armour. So there's lots of, and I think that's right in a way, because centuries are just made up. They're just arbitrary numbers, okay? And we can't. Why would someone study armour from 1390 to 1400 and then not study it from 1410 to 1400 to 1410? Because they're connected. Everything continued. It's a continuum. So number one, I think it's right that you look at, if you're looking up to 1401 that you look beyond 1401 as well. But firstly, I'd be interested to know, why have you got particularly interested in armour of the early 15th century, and is that something you're intending to explore more? And secondly, what things to do with 14th century armour have you become particularly interested in? Because I know there's something about certain types of helmets, but I'll let you talk about that. So first question about early 15th century.
Why early 15th century? Well, I mean, I can say that, I mean, I'm clearly biased, that I've been interested mostly in early Italian 15th century armor, and especially in the development of armets which have a visor or a almost like complete face protection. So then I've been tracking down all the depictions of like the earliest armets that we can find. So then the very earliest armet with a movable visor is like from 1410, from I think the jetty version of the Flos Duelatoro.
The Getty, is that the earliest one?
I think so.
But we don't know that Getty dates to 1410.
But it's, I mean, there's like similar, like there's a similar visor in 1412 as well.
Okay,
so it's like really 1410 thereabout.
Yeah.
And so I've been.
And Pisani Dossi, interestingly, has opened.
Yeah, and the Pisani Dossi has which is almost as the armet in the Gwyn collection now, which has this like just the jaw, and like it just covers just below the nose and the eyes.
Very good for breathing and visibility.
Yeah.
Not so good for protection.
But it's always a balance, like how much you want to breathe and see, and how much you don't want to get stabbed in the eye.
Yeah,
it's always a fine balance.
That's life.
It's like an eternal debate that there's almost no solution for.
And of course, later on, they just decided visibility and breathing was more important, and just pretty much had open face helmets.
So then I've been working like with the armets. I also wanted to see like when the Italian style started to develop. So like the asymmetrical pauldrons, for example. So that's also, you can find in the Pisani Dossi. There's a big single piece.
So for those who don't know, there's what I have seen referred to as the international style or universal style. So in other words, that there's a suggestion, not saying this is correct, but there's a suggestion that plate armour was more or less the same over most of Western Europe up until about 1390, and I think, and then started to diverge into different styles. I would argue that there were differences earlier than that.
I would say from, I mean, in England, for example, they started having full plate arms
with the spalder connected to the top of the, which is a common thing that they get wrong. And this is one of Augusto's bugbears. Is so pretty much most 14th century reenactors have arm armour up to here, then laced to points, and then they have a separate spalder. But the armour that's usually based on is English armour, which actually the spalder is connected to the, and it has to fit absolutely precisely to bend in the right way.
Ask Ian.
Yeah, Ian Lespino has done videos about this, and it has to be the exact right length of your arm, and it has to be pointed at the right point so that it doesn't impede the movement of it.
But I mean, going back to the styles, like you can trace differences in like English, German, and Italian styles already from maybe the 1330s, if not before. Like in Germany, they really liked mail for some reason. They didn't cover arms with mail much until like the 50s. In England, they started having plate in
really
the 10s,
early,
in the 20s. So like they were actually, English knights have been always the one that have been like mostly covered in plate.
So what's weird is so many people who consider themselves medievalists describe England as a backwater. And in the 14th century, come on, it was a European superpower practically. I mean, remember that a third of France was English at one point. Bordeaux was English for 300 years, and the English, the Great Company and the White Company were going around Italy after the peace with France in 1370, going around Italy fighting everybody as mercenaries. And Sir John Hawkwood becoming the hero of Florence and all this kind of thing. They fought as mercenaries in as far east as Poland. English longbowmen are recorded in Prussia and Germany, Bohemia, all over. It's interesting as well that the English didn't get involved in certain things. For example, the Nicopolis campaign, where the mostly French army got utterly owned by the Turks in 1396, and Marshal Boucicaut got taken prisoner. Again, he got taken prisoner at the Battle of Agincourt as well. He loved getting taken prisoner. But yeah, so the English were all over it in the 14th century. They were doing militarily very, very well under Edward III. English armour seems to go hand in hand with that, and it's really pioneering. If you look at if you're looking at plate armour in the 14th century, English plate armour is some of the most pioneering stuff out there.
They are the one that started to have the first one to have articulated limbs for both legs and arms,
and fully enclosed.
Cuisses and arms as well. Like they were they're the ones they were, I think, developing that the earliest, and then other people in Europe adopted it later on.
I mean, there is a question about why, and that's a huge topic. And in fact, do you know what? Let's do that as a separate. We're going to do that, film that as a separate video after this one. So let's finish off talking about your page.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking for 27.5 minutes already, which is pretty good going even for me. So yeah, where do you? So 15th century armour.
Yeah.
Why did you get into 15th century armour in a nutshell?
I wanted to. I want to build myself a kit which is full enclosed, that it's not English. So then I started looking at Italian sources because, I mean, come on, home.
Yeah, and Fiore and
Fiore,
Fiore's from 1410.
So I've been trying to get like sources for like a kit that has backplate, solid backplate, closed cuisses, closed arms, big pauldrons, and that seems to come about
after 1400.
Like in 14, I would say 1415, you have like white harness in Italy with like an armet, which supposedly could also have a wrapper already in the 1415, which is much earlier than what people think. People think of wrappers in maybe in the 40s or the 50s in the 15th century, but it seems to date much earlier. So I wanted to have like an excuse to have a full plate harness, which in Italy they really liked patching up with mail, the shoulders and the legs and stuff. But
well, in fact, the armet as a whole unit, the armet as a helmet. I remember, there were various older arms and armour books that would consider the armet something that was from 1440 onwards. But as you say, they start to appear by 1410.
Actually, the first effigy that we know with a clear armet, with the pivots on sculpted on the effigies, like from 1396 or 1930.
Crazy.
So that's.
And so
it's up to
for those who
when the effigy was made, but the person died, and usually there was like 1 year gap between.
For those who don't know what an armet is it looks a little bit like a bassinet, but it's constructed completely differently in that you've got essentially a helmet bowl on the top of the head and then two cheek pieces which close around the side. And what that enables you to do, and I think I'm pretty sure Ian's done a video about, so look on Knight Errant's channel again for a far more in-depth explanation of this, but generally speaking, you've got two hinges at the side where the plates come down, they join at the chin and at the neck, and that enables you to get a helmet which is completely goes around the head and is closely fitting to the head, whereas with a bassinet, if you want it to be able to get over the head, it has to be the same width at the bottom as it is at the top in a way to get around the head to go on. So you end up with this big bulky sort of neck bit. The armet, for whatever reason, is just a much more closely fitting helmet, and it's nicer to wear in a way, isn't it? Because it's I've only ever put on an armet once actually. I own a couple of bassinets, but I never owned an armet. But they're just kind of a bit lighter.
They are tighter, and I mean they are more with your head, while you have less bulk at the neck. So then everything is one unit. So then it's just nicer.
Yeah. Okay, so we now know why you got into early 15th century stuff, because you're thinking about making your own armour, and that's where you want to centre it, which is ironic considering that you're known for 14th century armour. And lastly, I think, what's the thing about 14th century, or let's say the two things, or two or three, whatever you want, two or three things about 14th century armour that have either surprised you the most or interested you the most?
Surprised me the most. Oh.
Well, let's talking about these helmets. So these helmets which are often assumed to be jousting.
Oh, okay, yeah. The frog mouth helm on food. That's a hot topic.
So the frog mouth. So you know, a helmet which has this kind of scooped up front here, and people think about actually what are jousting helmets from the later 15th century. But this kind of shape of visor appears earlier, doesn't it?
So it seems to be like a development from the classic great helm, and then there's numerous depictions of from independent sources from 1390 until the 1420s, where you have knights fighting on foot with these helms, which are usually associated with mounted combat and jousting. And there's at least 20-25 different depictions of knights fighting on foot with this great helms, which have they are big and they have this profile, like the frog mouth
kind of a scoop.
exactly. And
so anything hitting anywhere near the eye slot is just going to slide down and away. And they tend to, well, they can meet like this, can't they? So they can either meet level or sometimes the top's inside.
Like
never like that, because obviously then things would slide up and go into the eye hole. But if we've got the eye hole here, they either finish level with each other or with the top kind of almost inside the front.
Exactly. So that was surprising, and also I mean, for example, like the fighting community is disagreeing a lot on that, because the evidence shows that, I mean, it was done, it seems like.
Yeah, reenactors will usually go, oh, you can't fight on foot in this.
You can't fight because you can hear, you can see, you can breathe, but it's
there in the manuscript, so not just one or two, it's in lots, isn't it?
And also like an Italian effigy with a knight wearing a great helm, which actually shows the mail under and the upper edge of the breastplate. So actually the helm was not worn with a bassinet, which was very common, like if not predominant thing to wear a bassinet and then a great helm. But that helm was worn alone, and it was a frogmouth helm, but it was kind of tight, so it wouldn't sit on the shoulders, but it would sit quite high on the head.
And we do, of course, see there's an example, at least one, I think maybe two examples in Fiore in the Getty manuscript.
Which
again,
is a weird. I don't know. It can't understand if it's a armet or a great helm. It's
but the shape of the front is definitely like this, and you can only see one slit. Now, it's not to say that some of those maybe didn't have little holes, perforations for breathing, which you can see through. But usually in manuscripts you don't get that level of detail. Sometimes you do, but usually you don't. Funnily enough, I know of a later 15th century manuscript which has this type of front where they have put the holes in, but they're shown really massive, like the artist has drawn massive, so big that you could just stick a sword straight through the hole. But obviously that's artistic license, but it's nice because it shows that, you know, that does have holes in, which you could see through, of course. And in fact, we do have the example, possibly, in the Pisani Dossi of the bassinets, which seem to have almost like a perforated or grill, and fighting in poleaxe, which might be a tournament thing, we don't know. There's a couple of other manuscripts which show bassinets
it didn't last. I mean, it lasted maybe 20 years and it dropped. So
there's a couple of manuscripts where we do see where there's no eye slots as such, just the visor has lots of holes in it. So that was done sometimes.
So it was done, but it wasn't very common, and it was dropped maybe for a good reason also.
Are there any other things in 14th century armour that have either captured you or confused you?
It was interesting to see how early knights had not solid, but like plate defenses for the back. So like having cotoplates or corazzinas or this weird hybrid, and they start, like in Europe at least, like having solid plates even if they're overlapped, like in a puzzle almost. But they seem to like start about the 1330s, 1340s. I don't remember now, but it's kind of like early.
I think probably earlier than that. In reality, that you just can't see it often because there's a surcoat over the top. I mean. Something that puzzles me actually about 14th century armour for my own part is, and we've spoken about this previously, and I don't think there's an answer to this, is that the coater plates had been around since about 1300, or earlier than that actually, the late 1200s, in some form, and the classic coater plates was extremely common all over Europe by 1340. And yet in Germany, they adopted a solid breastplate in from about 1350-ish onwards, that was very often worn with a fold, with a long, like you sometimes see it like scale armour. And very long ago I did a video saying how you don't get scale armour, you do get scale armour. I'll do another video about scale armour at some point, but there's various examples of scale armour, but it just wasn't as common as you'd sometimes think. But you see a solid breastplate worn with a mail shirt, and there's no evidence whatsoever of any plate on the back. And I always find it kind of really weird that particularly German, you do see it elsewhere, you see it in a couple of English manuscripts as well actually, but German knights, or men-at-arms specifically, almost seemed to go backwards because they went, oh, a solid breastplate, that looks really cool, and slapped it over the top of their mail shirt, but then neglected to have any plates on their back. But maybe they thought, we'll never retreat from the enemy. And
I mean, Ian did a good video on that as well.
Oh, right, I didn't know he'd done
about
on
like back plates, and the reason why it's always so hard, because as your favorite word, context, maybe the Germans fought in a different way than the Italians and the English did.
But you've got the Kerberg breastplate, which comes around the side, but it doesn't really, it goes a bit around the back.
It doesn't go in the back, and it doesn't protect the back at all.
I mean, it certainly doesn't protect up on the shoulder blades at all, and so that kind of seems, again, strange, because the Kerberg breastplate dates to, what is that, about 1390, 1380?
The Kerberg, maybe the 70s actually.
Yeah, right, it's earlier, okay. But then you've got for 30 years before, for decades before that, you've got fully enclosing coats of plates. So why?
I mean, but the back is almost like the last thing that has been enclosed with a solid plate. It's the very last piece. So everything else has been covered with arms, legs, gloves, head, face, whatever, like with a solid single plate, and the back is the last thing that gets the treatment.
I wonder also if, in terms of armour, what they were most concerned about. Apart from arms and legs, should we say, but on the torso, what they were most concerned about were missile weapons more than hand weapons.
To forget about lances.
And lances, of course,
lances, sorry.
Like lances. Lanza, yeah.
A knight, that's what would be facing more often, like crossbows, spears, and lances. That's what kills you. Swords.
And I have to say, even for those of you in HEMA who ever do melee games, we're not. It's very different to armoured fighting. It's a game, but it's relatively rare that you get hit on the back. And if you do get hit on the back, in my experience, you tend to get hit on the back of the head rather than anywhere else. Because if someone gets behind you, they tend to see you as a target. They know you're not going to be a target for long, and they think, there's my opportunity, and they just come with a big downwards blow. Well, if they're coming with a big downwards blow, you don't need a back plate to protect from that. I mean, even if it lands on your back, it's gonna come with a blow down your back. So, to my mind, your mail shirt will protect enough from that anyway. Most of the time, it's stabbing from spears and half sword and pole axes and things like this that's the threat to the front, which will be done in a more coordinated way. So maybe they just found that statistically, people just didn't get stabbed in the back very much. I don't know. And ironically, the way that you make a backplate, even with a coat of plates, it leaves an opening to the mail here anyway. So actually, if you do get behind someone, you can stab them through the mail here with your half sword or your pole axe. So, and you can never protect that, because you need to be able to have that mobility here anyway, unless you get to kind of like Henry VIII's period, until you get to Tudor period, where literally everything, even on the inside of the arms, is covered with plate. But in the 14th and early 15th century, everything around here is protected by mail. So you can't plate everything. And the last thing, I think the final thing we'll talk about, what are we on? We're on quite a long time, but it's a big video. And we've covered a lot of really useful ground here, but is the metallurgy or metallurgy, you never know how to pronounce it, of the metal. And that's something else you've looked at as well, isn't it? And I was, again, when I was younger, I was fascinated because I wanted to make reconstructions, and mild steel is what all reenactment armour used to. And I used to think, would 14th century, let's talk about 14th century specifically, would it have been made of mild steel or the equivalent? I talked to Toby about this, and his view was that you can find everything from iron right the way through to hardened carbon steel, and I think that's what most of the evidence is now showing.
Most of the data comes from the night in the blast furnace by Alan Williams, which is actually
who works up there.
Who works up here, and I met yesterday. So he has done most of the work, and he's been going through all the major collections in Europe. And I've been gathering. He's been analyzing armor from the late 13th century to the 17th century, and I've just collected all the data about the 14th century. So as far as he researched, of course, best armor, Italian armor, has the higher amount of carbon, and the one that has been treated most successfully. But yeah, like you said, the metal in armor ranges from what we know as wrought iron to tempered spring steel, so from 0 or less than 0.1% of carbon to up to 0.7% carbon, and which has then been heat treated. So there was a lot of variety, and the thing that what most people don't know is that medieval metal and iron, it's not homogeneous, not like modern steel. Modern steel is rolled from sheet, so it's
factory made.
The same consistency. While even if you have like good quality carbon steel, which has been heat treated, you could have slag content, which is almost like having like glass beads in the metal, in the microstructure of the metal. So those could be weak points that can crack and be. So the best quality steel is the one that's the most homogeneous possible.
Also, of course, if you're heat treating something and it has inclusions in it of slag and other stuff, it can mess up the heat treatment as well, or it can create soft spots or hard spots, or brittle spots, all types of stuff. And the other thing, as well as this huge variation in hardness of the steel, is also thickness of the steel. And that's the other thing. When people are obsessing talking about, oh, will a longbow arrow go through medieval plate armour? Well, there's a lot of things to say about the longbow arrow and the bow shooting it and the person shooting it, but also what do you also say about the armour? And the problem is you've got a huge variation in the metal, varying from iron all the way to carbon steel, sometimes heat treated, sometimes not, sometimes work hardened perhaps, and then you've also got the thickness. Well, where on the armour are you talking about? Are you talking about a breastplate? Are you talking about parts of someone's vambrace? And even again, this is a difference between most modern recreated armour and historical armour. You take just one piece of armour, let's take a gauntlet, okay? So you take a gauntlet backplate, say an hourglass gauntlet. Most modern armour will be made out of 16 gauge steel, 16 gauge mild steel, sometimes carbon steel, and it will be, generally speaking, the same. I mean, it depends which armour you go to, but it will be, generally speaking, the same thickness throughout.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas they wouldn't have necessarily started with a uniform thickness sheet, or not a thin one anyway. Hello, pigeon. We would have started with something more like a billet and forged it out.
Most likely for like especially helmets and the breastplates, most likely they did work from the inside. Like the bassinet in the Wallace collection, the one with the associated helm-scope visor, has clear marks of has bands of forging, which means that it was most probably done like from the center out, from the inside out. So then they had, maybe the armor had like 3 apprentices.
It's almost like making a bowl, like a pottery bowl.
From clay, exactly the same thing, but you do it from the inside out.
Squishing, forcing
the material from the inside out. While most of the modern armors, we do it from the outside. We raise it, so we compress the edges and become thicker. But actually, the edges of helmets are like 1 millimeter, 1.5. They're very thin.
So this is the thing which I found shocking when I first started finding out a little bit more detail like this about real medieval armour, probably back in the late 90s, when I started to actually look and handle some mostly 15th century pieces, actually at the Wallace collection, was how thick. If you take a sallet, for example, a sallet can be insanely thick at the top, like 5 millimeter thick at the top sometimes,
could be.
Right the way down to sometimes like it might be as little as 1 millimeter or half a millimeter thick right down at the bottom edge. So a huge variation, simply because you don't need metal down here, and it's partly to do with the construction method. You start at the top and you work the sides out, but also partly because you think about, well, it's where is it being hit, where do you need strength, where don't you need strength.
But to that, we have some examples of like some bassinets that, for example, are maybe 1.5 millimeter thick at the front, and they're like 3 millimeter thick at the back, which is completely counterintuitive, and it's not
strange oddities,
doesn't lend to the theory that they had most thickness in the front of the helm and then they were thinner on the back. Maybe the breastplates, because it's easier to work that way. I mean, you start with a 8 millimeter billet and then you just hammer it as much as you need, so then it's 3 millimeter in the end on the front, and then at the sides it's 1.5. But some helmets seem to be thicker in the front, some other are thicker on the back. So
I know one helmet that is insanely thick is the so-called Henry V helm from Westminster Abbey. That's very, very thick and heavy.
13 millimeters thick.
13 millimeters.
12, 13 millimeter in the front.
That's
the
insane. That's the thickness of the base of something like a Zweihander blade or a poleaxe blade. That's absolutely insane to have that, and it makes you question the whole purpose of the helmet. Was it just made as a funeral object?
Most likely not. It was probably used in.
But why would it need to be that thick? I mean, that is without a question. That's bulletproof.
Yes.
Okay. No, I don't believe any pistol will get through that thickness of steel.
I mean, extra safety.
A rifle will, but a pistol won't. Amazing. I mean, anyway, that's a whole thing by itself. So let's wrap it up there, because we have covered a lot of ground. My God, this is a big video. I'm going to have to split this into 2 parts. Cheers, folks.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.